All right, everyone, get ready because we are diving deep into the world of qualitative research today.
It's going to be good.
It is going to be good. Really interesting stuff in this one.
Yeah, qualitative research, always so interesting.
Always so interesting. Yeah, we're looking at chapter 13.pdf.
Lots of good stuff in there.
Yeah, it really gets into key informant interviews, kata.
Ooh, kata, that's a good one.
Yeah, and how those could even be used together.
Yeah, combining those methods, really powerful.
Yeah, but let's start with those key informant interviews because chapter 13 really stresses these aren't just like your casual chats, right?
Right.
We're talking about getting insights from some really influential people.
Absolutely. The people in the know,
Yeah.
the ones who are really making the decisions.
Yeah, shaping their fields.
Exactly.
So we're talking CEOs.
Yeah, CEOs, policymakers, longtime professionals.
People who've been around the block a time or two.
Exactly. They have that deep knowledge and the power to really make change happen.
So why is that so valuable to our listeners?
Well, it gives us a peek behind the curtain, right?
Yeah.
It helps us understand not just what is happening, but the why.
Right, the how.
Yeah, the how those decisions are being made.
It's like that inside scoop, right?
Yes, exactly.
Instead of just reading a press release.
Exactly, you get it right from the source.
Straight from the horse's mouth, as they say.
That's it. No secondhand accounts here.
So say someone wants to really understand, I don't know, the future of renewable energy.
Okay.
They could just read reports or...
talk to someone who's actually doing it.
Right. Talk to someone on the ground.
Right. Someone like a solar energy entrepreneur.
Yeah, someone who's really building that future.
Exactly. And they can tell you about the day-to-day challenges, what they're excited about, the stuff we don't normally see.
Right, like all the behind-the-scenes stuff.
Exactly.
Now, this all sounds great, but...
It's not always easy.
Yeah, chapter 13 kind of hints at that.
It does.
Getting access to these key informants or key eyes, it can be a challenge.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you're asking for their time, and their time is valuable.
Right, so how do you even get your foot in the door?
Well, you have to make it worth their while. Right.
Okay.
You need a good pitch.
What?
You have to prove you've done your homework, that their insights are going to be used for something meaningful.
So it's not just showing up with a list of questions.
No. It's about building that rapport,
Oh.
making it a conversation.
Right, so they don't feel like you're being interrogated.
Exactly. And that's where those power dynamics come into play.
Right, because these are important people.
They are. So you have to find that balance
Between
respect, being respectful of their time and position, but also not being afraid to ask the tough questions.
Right, the hard-hitting stuff.
Yeah, the stuff that really gets to the heart of the matter.
You want them to be comfortable, but you also need to dig deep.
It's a balancing act for sure.
Because you don't want them to just give you the company line, right?
No, you want the real deal.
The honest truth.
Exactly.
So are there strategies for that?
There are, and the chapter mentions one that I really like.
Okay, lay it on us.
So instead of thinking of it as an interview, approach it as a learning opportunity for you.
Okay.
You're there to learn from their expertise.
I like that.
Yeah, it shifts the whole dynamic.
From interrogation to more of a conversation.
Exactly, more relaxed.
So you're kind of turning them into the mentor in a way.
In a way, yeah, and who doesn't like sharing their wisdom?
Especially when they feel respected and heard.
Right, exactly.
But even then, you've got to keep them engaged, right?
You do, because like we said, their time is precious.
Don't want them watching the clock the whole time.
Exactly.
How do you keep them hooked?
Keep it relevant.
Okay.
Ask questions that actually matter to their work, their challenges.
So they can really sink their teeth into it.
Exactly. Maybe even offer a fresh perspective they haven't considered before.
So it's about keeping them on their toes.
A little bit, yeah. Making them think.
Make them think? Maybe even challenge some assumptions?
In a way that benefits them, too.
Right. It's a two-way street.
Always.
So everyone wins.
Everyone wins.
Exactly. Everyone wins. But even with the best approach, we can't forget that key informants, they're human too.
Right, they are.
They've got their own biases, their own experiences that shape how they see things.
Absolutely. It's super important to keep that in mind.
So it's not enough to just take their word as gospel.
Not at all. That's where triangulation comes in.
Triangulation. Okay, I like the sound of that. What is that?
So basically, you got to do a little detective work.
Interesting.
You can't just rely on one person, even if they seem super knowledgeable.
Right, you got to get multiple perspectives.
Exactly. So you look for other data, other sources.
Like what kind of sources?
Well, it depends, but think company reports, maybe interviews with other employees, public records, anything that can support or even challenge what your KI told you.
Okay, so you're looking for that corroborating evidence.
Exactly.
Or maybe even some contradictions.
Right, because that helps you see the bigger picture, and it makes your findings way more credible.
So you're not just relying on one person's interpretation of events.
Exactly, you're getting closer to the truth, or at least a more well-rounded understanding.
Makes sense. It's like putting together a puzzle.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
And you need all those different pieces to see the whole picture. Now,
Exactly.
speaking of different approaches, Chapter 13 also talks about this other method, computer-aided text analysis.
Kata.
Yeah, kata. And I'll be honest, when I first heard that, I thought, robots scanning scrolls?
Right, it sounds very futuristic.
It does, but it's actually a lot more practical, right?
Way more practical, although it can feel like a superpower.
Okay, how so?
Well, imagine you have tons of text data.
Okay, like what?
Interview transcripts, we've all got those.
Right, tons of those.
Annual reports, articles, even social media posts.
So much text.
So much text, and Kata can help you make sense of it all.
By doing what?
It turns all that text into measurable data.
Oh, wow, so you can actually analyze it.
Right, you can see the patterns, the trends that might be hidden in all those words.
That's huge, especially these days when we're just inundated with information.
It's a game changer, especially compared to more traditional methods.
I bet. So instead of getting lost in all those words,
You can actually see the forest for the trees.
exactly, you get the bigger picture.
Right. And because you're looking at naturally occurring text, it can be more authentic, less biased.
Oh, that's a good point. You're not just relying on someone's interpretation of what they observed.
Exactly.
You're getting it straight from the source, so to speak.
Yep, the raw data.
Now, like any powerful tool, I imagine there are some caveats.
There are always.
So what are the potential pitfalls with kata?
Well, the chapter talks about measurement error, which is a big one.
Okay, measurement error, that makes sense. You want to make sure you're measuring the right things.
Exactly. And it breaks it down into 3 types: transient error, specific factor error, and algorithm error.
Okay, those sound a little intimidating.
They do, but they're actually pretty easy to understand.
All right, break it down for us.
Okay, so transient error, that's basically when the language used to describe something changes over time, even if the underlying concept hasn't really changed.
Oh, interesting.
Think about how we used to talk about computers, floppy disks, megabytes, things like that.
Right, totally different lingo now.
Totally, but the basic idea of a computer, it's still the same.
Right, we just use different words.
Exactly. So you have to be careful when you're analyzing text from different time periods because the language might not be directly comparable.
So context is key.
Always, context is king.
Okay, what about specific factor error?
That one's all about the key words you're using in your analysis.
Yep.
If they're too broad, you might miss important nuances.
So you might misinterpret what's actually being said.
Exactly. It's like trying to catch a fly with a fishing net. You're not going to be very successful.
Right, the wrong tool for the job.
Exactly. So you need to be really specific with your keywords, maybe even use phrases instead of single words.
And again, context is important, right?
Hugely important, because a word can mean totally different things depending on how it's used.
Yeah, like cool. It can mean so many things.
Exactly. So you have to be careful about how you're interpreting those words.
Okay, last but not least, algorithm error. That one sounds kind of scary.
It does, right. But it's basically just the fact that different kata software can produce slightly different results.
Oh, interesting. Why is that?
Well, they might make different assumptions about things like punctuation, synonyms, how words are stemmed, that kind of thing.
So it's like using different types of measuring tools.
Exactly. You might get slightly different measurements even if you're measuring the same thing.
So what's the solution?
The chapter suggests trying out different software packages, comparing the results, just to make sure your findings are consistent.
So it's all about being thorough.
Absolutely. And transparent.
Makes sense. So it's always good to double check your work.
Always.
Now, moving on. Chapter 13 also briefly mentions this idea of mixed methods research,
Ah, yes. Mixed methods.
which basically means combining qualitative and quantitative data, right?
That's the gist of it, yeah.
So you're bringing together those rich, in-depth insights from things like interviews
Right.
with the bigger picture trends you get from numbers.
Exactly. It's about getting a more complete understanding.
So why is that so valuable? What's the advantage of this kind of blended approach?
Well, quantitative data can tell you what's happening,
Okay,
but it doesn't always tell you why.
right. The why is key.
Exactly. And that's where qualitative data comes in.
It gives you that context.
It does. It helps you understand the human side of things, the motivations, the experiences.
So give us an example. How would you use this in the real world?
Sure. Let's say you're researching consumer behavior.
Go ahead.
You might find that sales for a certain product have gone way up.
great news.
Right. But the numbers alone don't tell you why people are suddenly buying this product.
So how do you figure that out?
That's where you might use focus groups or in-depth interviews to understand what's driving those purchasing decisions.
So you're going beyond the numbers, getting into people's heads.
Exactly.
Interesting. So it's like looking at a map versus actually exploring a city.
Not that analogy.
The map gives you the overview, but to really understand a place, you have to experience it firsthand.
Exactly. And that's what mixed methods allows you to do. Connect those dots between the big picture and the individual experiences.
Really cool. Now, one last thing Chapter 13 touches on, and I think it's so important,
Okay.
transparency in research.
Ah, so crucial.
Because even the most amazing findings, they don't mean much if we don't trust how they were obtained.
Right. You need that solid foundation.
Exactly. So how do we ensure transparency, especially in qualitative research, where it's not always about numbers and statistics?
It's all about documentation, being really clear and honest about every step of your process.
So how did you choose your participants? What questions did you ask?
Exactly. And how did you analyze your data? Laying it all out there so that others can understand your reasoning, your methodology.
It's like showing your work in math class.
Exactly.
You might have the right answer, but can you explain how you got there?
Right. Transparency builds trust.
And it leads to replicability, which Chapter 13 also talks about.
Right. Replicability.
So what does that mean in terms of qualitative research? Because it's not always as straightforward as replicating a scientific experiment.
True, but the basic idea is the same.
Okay.
Someone else should be able to take your methods and at least arrive at similar findings.
So it's about establishing a level of trustworthiness.
Exactly, showing that your findings aren't just a fluke.
Right, that they're based on a rigorous process that others can follow and potentially replicate.
Exactly, and that's why that detailed documentation is so important.
It's all connected.
It is. Transparency, replicability, it all builds on itself to strengthen the research.
It's like building a foundation for future discoveries.
Perfectly said.
Well, it seems like we've reached the end of our deep dive into qualitative research.
It's flown by.
It really has. We covered so much ground, from key informant interviews to CATA.
Don't forget mixed methods.
Right, mixed methods, so many tools and approaches to help us understand this complex world.
And don't be afraid to use them.
Exactly. So to all our listeners out there, as you embark on your own research journeys, remember what we've talked about today.
Ask the tough question.
Dive deep, be curious,
And embrace the unknown.
because that's where the real discoveries are made.
Absolutely.
Until next time, happy researching, everyone.